The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus took Peter, James, and his brother John, and led them up a high mountain by themselves, apart. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no fuller on earth could bleach them. Then Elijah appeared to them along with Moses, and they were conversing with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus in reply, "Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." He hardly knew what to say. They were so terrified. Then a cloud came, casting a shadow over them. From the cloud came a voice. "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." Suddenly, looking around, they no longer saw anyone but Jesus alone with them. As they were coming down from the mountain, he charged them not to relate what they had seen to anyone, except when the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
There are 2 times in the Gospels when the voice of God is heard coming, speaking from a cloud. And the purpose of that narration, the voice of God speaking from the cloud, is to echo and to sum up the way that God reveals himself in the Old Testament, particularly in the Exodus, but in a few other areas. God is seen as coming upon his people in a cloud from which the voice of God speaks. So it's pretty clear that something very significant is happening here. The first time in the Gospels is, of course, when Jesus is baptized in the Jordan by John. After Jesus submits to the baptism of John, then the cloud comes over and the voice comes out of the cloud. "You are my beloved Son. In you I am well pleased." Who is the voice speaking to? Jesus. The bystanders, if they heard it, they were listeners. They were spectators. The voice was speaking to Jesus. Here in the Transfiguration, when Jesus manifests his glory as the Son of God, and the apostles, says, were fearful, were frightened. They didn't know what to do, what to say. And the cloud comes, and the voice says almost the same thing, but with a significant difference. "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." Listen to him. The voice is speaking to the apostles around Jesus and speaking to us. How do we listen to Jesus? How do we listen to the human Jesus, the earthly Jesus, as he speaks now, representing and being the Son of God? How do we listen to the Son of God speaking to us now? Well, we look at what Jesus said as recorded in the Gospels originally. What are the two most frequent commands of Jesus? Not advice, not words of wisdom, but commands that Jesus makes as recorded in the Gospels. The first most frequent command of Jesus is, don't be afraid. Do not fear. Whatever, do not fear. The second most, what do we have to be afraid of? Well, let's listen to the second most frequent command. Love your enemies. Let your love be without limits. Not just include your enemies in love, but love them above all. Oh boy, there's a lot to be afraid of there, isn't there? And yet, those two commandments, I think, go hand in hand. We need to take seriously the command of, above all, learning to love our enemies. That applies to our own personal enemies, the people who seek to harm us or who have harmed us. That applies also to our situation in the world today. How do we learn to love our enemies? Well, take seriously the second commandment. That first commandment. Do not be afraid. First, I think, put our fears into the Lord's hands and ask him to heal our fears. Ask him to heal those things that block our love of enemies. And then secondly, pray for our enemies, as he told us to. Put our enemies, whether personal ones or the ones who threaten our world, put them into his hands. And say, first of all, to the Lord, these folks are yours. Take care of them and help me to trust how you take care of them. I think if everything that we did and decided were to stem from those two kinds of prayer, our world would be very different, and we would be instruments in transforming, transfiguring, if you will, our world into the image of Jesus.